Let us begin with a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be strengthening and pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. One of the theologians I've read off and on throughout my life is a German theologian by the name of Jürgen Moltmann. And in one of his writings, he talks about the sacrament of baptism. And most people, they think of baptism as a way to eradicate sin, or a baptism as a way to enter in a new life, or baptism as a way to become and join a congregation or be a part of the Christian movement. But Moltmann argues, in light of all those definitions of baptism, that baptism is a vocation. It's a calling. We enter into the baptismal waters because we are called to do something greater, more significant with our life than where we currently see ourselves in the moment. Just before this passage that Pam wonderfully read to us in a unique way, just before this experience of Jesus' wilderness experience is his baptism. He's baptized. And as soon as he's baptized, he goes out to the desert and goes through a period of discernment, trying to figure out his life. And I still remember my freshman year in college at TCU. I took a New Testament class as a freshman at TCU. And I remember my professor, Ambrose Edens, who had been there forever. My mom had taken him as a New Testament professor. He had been around a long time. And I remember his lecture the day he talked about this passage of Jesus going into the wilderness. And before he got into the nuances of the text, he said, "Do you have a clear understanding of who you are and how you want to be remembered?" That's what Jesus does when he goes in the wilderness, he said. These temptations he encounters is about him discerning and critically thinking for himself, who do I want to be and how will I be remembered? Turning stones into bread, do I want to be remembered as the person that just handed out and helped everybody in need in every moment? Do I want to be remembered for more than that? Do I want to be remembered for being in charge of all this territory and all this land? Do I want to be remembered for power and privilege? Do I want to jump off the edge and the top of the temple and be remembered for doing magical things that no one else can do? And Jesus, in that discernment period, decides that none of those three things are very enticing to him and chooses to live his life intimately and with other people his entire ministry. And so I say to ourselves, do we know who we are and how we want to be remembered? We start the first season of Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso enters the bright new screen of this episode 1. Ted is the eternal optimist. He is the humorist. He is the one that motivates others to do great things. And thinking, man, this Ted can do no wrong. And he has this ability to get people to do things they probably wouldn't have done by themselves. And Ted has this ability to gather people together and get together as a team and play as a team and getting the staff together to kind of all be one with one another. He has all these gifts and abilities. But as the season goes along, we get a bigger picture of what's going on behind the scenes in Ted's personal life, with the struggles of his own marriage and being distant from his son across the Atlantic, and how challenging that is for him. Probably one of Ted's greatest gifts of self-care to himself is humor, using jokes and turns of phrase and incidents to create and allow people to laugh. There's something about laughter that's good for a situation. Actually, studies show that laughter is one of the best things we can do physiologically for ourselves. It can spike the heart rate at the same time when your laughter is over, bring it down to a level that relaxes you. Whether Ted Lasso knew that or not, his gift and self-care of laughter for himself was actually a gift to other people in the spaces that he was around. He helped soften the environment, taking a tense place, a tense room, a tense locker room, a tense space with his boss, Rebecca, upstairs, using a little laughter, maybe a few little biscuits to kind of soften the space and make room for new things to happen. I kind of thought for a long time that it was Ted's own sense of self-care was just laughter alone. But I realized as the show went on that the kind of mechanisms that he had for himself in self-care worked up to a certain point to the place where it was no longer working for him. If you've watched the show at all, there's points in the series where he starts having anxiety attacks to the place where his hands shake and he can't concentrate. He has to escape from whatever situation he's in. He has to extract himself from the situations to kind of regather who he is. We recognize that his own self-care mechanisms weren't working for him anymore. He needed something more significant in his life to help him get through some of these most challenging periods, wilderness zones of his life. Now, there's other characters in the show that practice self-care, and I want to highlight just a few things in that self-care, sometimes we can do things for ourselves that are helpful to us, that help us along the way of taking care of ourselves. I think of Sam Obisanya, who is the player from Nigeria, is a great character in the film, or in the show. And Sam is super proud about where he comes from. And there's one particular episode he realizes that the sponsor on his shirt is actually a sponsor that's doing damage to his own country in Nigeria. And he decides to put black tape across the name of the sponsor as a sign of protest. And the other players decide to join him in that effort. And he goes out, and it's his way of responding to the angst he feels within himself. Later in the episodes, there's a time when his father is supposed to come and visit. But in the show, there is a resistance from people from other country entering into England. And so he texts his kind of protests on his phone, showing his disgust of the leader of England not allowing people from other places to come in. And there's angst with the responses that come with that. But I realized in the show, throughout the show, that for Sam, his own sense of self-care is activism, is not being silent, is being willing to rise up and actually allow your voice to be heard. And how challenging it is sometimes to allow your voice to be heard when sometimes it's scary to stand up and fight for something you know that is an injustice in the world. And Sam was one of those that's unwilling to allow his voice to be silent any longer. So he'll put tape across his jersey. He'll text a response in a difficult and conflicting way. And that's his own sense of self-care. There's Jamie Tart, who is the player that is all self-absorbed with himself. Every time he scores a goal, he kind of points to the back of his jersey. Me, me, me. It's all about me. And he's convinced that all he needs is himself, and it's only him to solve all the problems of the world. But as time goes on, he recognizes that his own self-absorption is to his own demise. We reach a place in the series of Ted Lasso where he goes up to Roy Kent, who's kind of been his internal nemesis. They kind of butt heads with one another. And at one point, they're in Sam's restaurant, Sam Obisanya's restaurant. And he says to Roy, "Will you train me? I need you to be my personal coach." It was at that moment that Jamie realized that self-care cannot be fully done alone. Sometimes our own sense of self-care, as much as we want to do ourselves, it requires others to be a part of our self-care. And for Jamie, who is the self-absorbed character in the film, when he reaches out to Roy Kent, who had been a former player and is now his coach, asking him to be his personal trainer, Jamie recognizes that his own sense of worth is strengthened by the including of others into his own narrative. Now, another character that's in the series, the one that we love to hate and hate to love, is Nathan Shelley. He starts out as the kit man, the one that kind of does the locker room care, and at some point along the way, Ted recognizes that he has gifts for football and soccer and wisdom and strategy, and kind of pulls him in, promotes him up to assistant coach, and uses his ideas and incorporates all these things. And Nathan Shelley, all along the way, has struggled, we discover, to be proud of who he is. And he struggled with his parents to find some sense of identity for himself. Nate eventually leaves the team of Richmond and eventually gets hired to coach kind of the nemesis team of West Ham. And at some point, Nathan can't even stand being the head coach of West Ham because of the boss of that particular team is Rupert, who is the kind of the personification of evil in the show, and eventually leaves being the coach of West Ham, a thing he had most admired and wanted to do in his life was coach, and he ends up leaving as the head coach of that team. He sulks away to his parents' house and stays in his own room that he grew up in and doesn't even want to get out and visit with his parents at all. His parents leave one day, and he makes his way up to the attic and pulls out personal effects from his childhood days. And as he's pulling things down, one of the things he pulls down is a violin. And he begins to play the violin. And we recognize in that moment that Nate's self-care was the gift of this instrument that allowed him to soothe his soul and rediscover what he wanted to do in his life. All those were what I would call kind of self-directed self-care models that these characters employ along the way. Now, Ted Lasso, I mentioned earlier, is employing laughter as a self-care model. He realizes that's not working for him. And so at some point, one of the players, Danny Rojas, needs the help of a professional therapist, and Sharon Fieldstone comes in to fill that space for the team. And the players go, and the first person that goes is Danny Rojas. He had accidentally killed the mascot of the team with a penalty kick at a soccer game. And he was a person that says, "Football is life." And next thing you know, he's in the shower and can't get past his own tears in the instant. And all of Ted's humor and motivation and all the techniques he has can't seem to shake Danny from this. And the team leadership says, maybe we need a counselor or therapist. And actually, Ted really doesn't like that idea, but he relents. He doesn't like the idea of a counselor or therapist, but he relents, saying, I've done everything I can. Something else needs to be employed to help this player out. Danny Rojas goes into Sharon Fieldstone's office. Next thing we know, Danny's running back on the field. Football is life again. And Ted's like going, what happened in that hour session that I couldn't do that Sharon Fieldstone brought out of him? And there was this curiosity in him. Other players began to make their way into Sharon Fieldstone's office and having had a better sense of self when they came out from the office. And as Ted sees more and more players go in and out and seeing the benefit of that experience, and Ted's own life going deeper and deeper in depression and anxiety about his own divorce and separation from his child, he finally relents to go to Sharon Fieldstone's office. And man, it is an uncomfortable scene when he enters in that room for the first time. He's like, where do I sit? Do I lie down? What do I do? All the uncomfortable spaces of, do I talk first? Do you talk first? Do we make some jokes? Do we get along with one another? What goes on in here? And then in an instant, he says, I can't do this, and just blurts out and leaves. We're about thinking he's going to jump in and actually go the next step and do some counseling and therapy, and out the door he goes, and nothing's accomplished. And then a little bit later, he shows up again at her door, looks in, Nope, can't do it, and doesn't go in. Eventually sits down and has a conversation with Sharon Fieldstone. And it's a little rocky at first how they navigate their relationship. And it's interesting, though, as that relationship unfolds in that storyline. As much as Sharon Fieldstone wants Ted to share his life in an honest and open way, it's only when Sharon Fieldstone begins to open up a little bit about herself they begin to make some headway with each other. One of the authors I read early on that has kind of been a mentor to me just through words, not through any personal meeting, was Henry Nouwen, who is an author, a spiritual author, and kind of a spiritual guru in a lot of ways. He wrote one book in 1972 entitled The Wounded Healer. It's only when we can face our wounds that healing can begin. Ted tried so much to push the wounds around him, to move past them. If I can just get past this, then all will be better. And Sharon Fieldstone helps him face the very wounds that he has and moves through the wounds so that healing is possible in his life. Therapists and counselors will say that self-care is a constant process of navigating so many difficult things: abuse, shame, tragedy, grief. We can go through a list of things we navigate through, and we fight to work through all the hardships that life brings. We want so hard to come out on the other side. And Nouwen reminds us that we are all wounded healers. We all have stuff inside of us. And one of the myths we often live with in the life of the church is, I wish my life was like this person or that person. They seem to have it all together over there. I wish our family was like that family. And we make observations about other people thinking their life is better than our lives. Truth be told, we're all wounded in our own unique ways. We work through our own hardships and difficulties in our own unique ways. And one of the great gifts of self-care that we have is getting past the myth that I can do it myself. And men are the worst at that. I need to fix it and solve it myself. I don't need someone else's help to do this. In Ted Lasso's 3 seasons, throughout the entire 3 seasons, is a constant gift of what it means to employ methods of self-care. Things that players and individuals do themselves, but recognizing that it's not enough. Self-care is made manifest and real in ourselves when we invite others into our self-care. And I would go on to say that self-care is not only indirect methods that we use, laughter, activism, instruments, mentors, all those things are valuable. But equally valuable are formal portions of self-care. Counselors, therapists, clergy, people that can be listeners to help you discern things going on in your life. Over 2,000 years ago, there was a gentleman that was super excited about his life. He dipped into the waters of baptism. I can't wait for what's next. But before he stepped out on his journey, he stepped to the side for a period of discernment to critically ask, who am I? How do I care for myself? And how will I be remembered? Ted Lasso said, it was never about me. It was always about something greater. When our self-care can get beyond just ourselves, we have the potential to heal and work through the healing of the wounds we have so that we can be the person that God knows we can already